everybody. I'm Charna Davis-Wiese, and welcome to UCF in Print. When I was growing up, sitting around the dinner table was so much more than a way of getting nourishment. It was a chance to connect to my family, to laugh, to talk, more times than not to fight. These days, many of us hardly ever get a chance to eat together. Are we missing out on more than just good conversation? Joining us today is Dr. Stacy Dunn, and part of the winning collaborative team on the book Drawing Families Together, One Meal at a Time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, this is something you wouldn't think you'd need a book for. It seems like it's common sense, but in reality, I remember before I had my first child, and we found out John was coming, and I thought, oh my gosh, I wish there were instructions.
Right, no manual.
and I guess I realized when I went to the bookstore and saw the childbirth and child rearing section, there really are, and this is kind of a book to help people figure out how to do something that should come naturally, and it's sit down with your kids and talk, and it doesn't happen.
Nope.
It doesn't happen. Hardly anybody sits down to a meal, do they?
No, we've all gotten so busy. It's one of those things where so many people grew up having that in their life, not at all recognizing how important it was, and just not recreating that in their own families.
Even though we all have these wonderful memories, even the fights, I'm sure, have a positive place.
Depending on how they turn out, yes, but there's so much positive that can come from people sitting down together as a family, talking about what's gone right, what's not gone so well, what family vacations would like to be planned, so that you really get to know each other the way you would when you sit down to dinner with friends.
Do you think that it's maybe that people don't think it's important? They don't think the conversation, they don't think the family meal is important.
The way the family meals are structured or not structured today, it doesn't seem important. It's buffet style. It's someone's coming, someone's going. Nobody's really focused on creating this kind of organized atmosphere where everyone comes together to share a meal. And so the way that people have been approaching dinner probably doesn't feel worthwhile. It's not rewarding. And just having so many activities scheduled in the evening has really prevented people from having that kind of time.
So this book actually teaches you how to do it. It says start out with one meal. Does it work if not everybody can make it?
Not really. Most everyone would agree that everyone has to be there, but what we point out is it doesn't have to be dinner. Everyone envisions this big dinner, and I suggest breakfast. What if it's just breakfast on the weekend or even during the week? And most people think in order to have a family dinner it has to be a roasted turkey with dressing and green beans, and it doesn't. We've had family meals over pop-tarts, and we've had family meals over beautiful steaks and potatoes. It doesn't matter what you're eating or what time of day. The idea is that you're all together, and we give some instructions so that it's not just about eating together, it's about finding ways to communicate better than might come naturally.
That was my next question is what do we do? How do we start? Somebody out there who thinks, I don't even know how to do this. Right. Is there a first step to take?
Or that won't work. I can't imagine that my children are too young or they're too old. It could work for all families, regardless of how they're made up, whether they're one parent or there are two parents. But we give the ideas of first deciding on when the family meal will be. So
as a group? This is a group decision?
As a group. And the idea is to really give a lot of control back to the kids. When you think about mealtime, it's come to the dinner table. They didn't have any say in what was going to be served or when it would be served. And so there's already some resistance, right? Oh, it's meatloaf. But what we suggest is that you get to take a turn picking what will be served. So each week a different family member picks what will be served. And it has to be within some reasonable guidelines, something hopefully at least somewhat nutritious, but it really gives the kids a sense that they're an important part of the entire meal, including the planning phase. So you take turns deciding when it will be, what it will be, and then you have it on a calendar and you try to create some excitement about it, that this isn't just a meal, it's a family meeting.
Okay, so we get there.
And
they're all sitting there, and they're not used to talking to each other. This might be something they have to learn.
Right. And so what we do is first we suggest you go ahead and eat and talk about what you would normally talk about. And you have to keep in mind that how old the children are will determine how things go. If you have real little ones, they're not going to stay very long, so you might need to be more quick. Whereas if you have slightly older children who are willing to sit through the meal and then talk, then you could take a little bit longer. But the meal starts out with, you have a talking torch, which could be any object that the kids pick. So my daughter used to pick a little stuffed animal. And you each take a turn holding that talking torch, and you start the meal with compliments. So everyone gets a turn and you compliment one another. When I first met the Kimballs and we started doing this, my older sister was living with us at the time, briefly in between jobs when she first moved to Florida. And we started to do this, and she just about cried and said, "This feels so weird. We never did this. We never sat around complimenting each other. Usually it's, you didn't do your homework. Well, what happened with that test this week?" And it tends to be a little critical at times. Maybe that's just my family, but I don't think so.
It's no wonder they don't want to come and sit at the dinner table.
Exactly. It's a time to be questioned about things. It's not the fun time that this creates. So you learn by starting out giving compliments, and that's a really good thing to model for our children. Learning to tell people what you value about them, what you enjoyed. And when we first started this, our daughter was very young, and her compliment would be something like, "You did my ponytail very well this morning, Mommy. That was great." And now she's 6.5, and she'll say, "It meant a lot to me that you met me at school for lunch today. I like how you put me first." And that comes from having done this for so long, and she really understands the concept of sharing positive information with other people at the dinner table.
We tried something similar. We tried something that I made up called kindness points. And you'd get kindness points, but you wouldn't get them from me, you would get them from the person who you did a kind deed to. And it started out, it was wonderful. It was so great. But then it became a competition on who could get the most kindness points, and a fight on, well, shouldn't I get kindness points for this? And it just totally backfired.
Well, families have a funny way of sabotaging even the best laid plans. And when we watch families try to do this, sometimes the compliments end up being a backhanded criticism, or they're really supposed to be a straightforward, "Here's something I really value about you," not even saying something like, "I really like the way you stopped that awful whining that's so annoying." I mean, that kind of takes away from the good feelings a child would get if you said something like, "I really like the way you helped your sister."
And it sounds like something a brother or a sister would say to each other. That'd be, "Oh, I have to do." But then when they realize they're going to get them back,
they really get into it. Families are so much more resistant than they need to be, because we've watched time and time again that they like this. They're doing this, and they learn some new things, and they get into it. Even the ones you think aren't really going to take it seriously.
So they've got the teenagers, probably.
Right.
Okay, you got the torch, you've got the compliments. So now the parents and everybody are looking at each other. Well, where do we go next?
Right. And there are different stages depending on how far along you are in using the family meeting. But one of the things that we ask people to do is to come up with a family vision statement. What's important to our family? How do we want to be as a family unit? What do we like about our family that we like to see more of? Or what are the things?
It's kind of like the ones you see at the front of a business.
Yes, very much so. In fact, Stephen Covey's book has a whole section on family vision statements, and the idea is to have a direction. If you have a compass in your family that says, "Here's what's important to us, and we'd like to treat each other based on this direction that we're going to move in," you're going to find that they have a greater sense of, why is it important to be nice to my sister? Well, because mutual respect is something that we really value.
How about some ideas for folks that are thinking, "Oh gosh, I don't even know where to start"?
Well, we list a lot of different prompts, so you might just start by saying things like, "What's important to us is," and have everyone complete the sentence, and kind of just get engaged in a conversation about, how do we want to treat each other? What kinds of things would we like to improve upon? And then you just go from there. And some family vision statements might be a phrase. We want to be really caring and supportive of one another.
And it's okay that if everybody has a different vision as well.
Usually you can incorporate bits and pieces from everyone's personal statement and then add it together so that you have kind of a mosaic of ideas that represent all of you.
So we've got the compliment. Now we've got the vision statement. And how do we keep everybody coming back after maybe the first week?
Well, it's fun. There's a tablecloth that the children can write on, and the parents can too. So it's a vinyl tablecloth, and it comes with markers. And this becomes actually a family heirloom, where one step is that you get to draw a picture or words about your favorite memory from the week, or it could be something that you really want to do, and they really like writing on the tablecloth. So sitting still and talking about things earns them the right to then start scribbling all over, and they really like to look back through the year and see, remember, look at this picture of this vacation. And you have things, one of the things I enjoyed the most was we talk about a family value each week, and that value might be something like respect. And so we'll talk about, well, what kinds of things can we do this week to show respect for one another, and have them generate ideas. Well, I could come to the dinner table when I'm called instead of being resistant and having to be called 10 times, or maybe I could, and they'll each come up with an idea about what they could do. And it doesn't have to be, no family is perfect. This is not about making people into some Cleaver household that doesn't exist and probably doesn't need to. This is about using your sense of humor and being as natural about it as your family feels comfortable, but it's not trying to add on more stress. One of the things that people say is, how am I going to do this? And frankly, we struggle to do it too. My 6-year-old will always point to him, where's the tablecloth? We have not had a meeting. And there are just weeks where we just say, we'll have 2 meetings next week.
That's right.
And so it's not about adding more pressure and making people feel like now they're failing at yet one more thing. It's trying to give you a tool so that you can feel good about the time that you are spending together.
And you have a lot of prompts in the book giving parents an idea about what to say and conversations to have with their children. Some of us, you and I, it's very easy. And we were talking about how you look in the rearview mirror of carpool line and the mothers are like this.
Right.
And the kids are looking out the window or playing the video games.
Right.
And they're not talking to each other at all. And from the comments I've had about people seeing me yak, 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 that must be more common than those of us who actually chat with our family.
Or worse, you see people on a cell phone.
Oh, I see that a lot.
Having their own adult conversation while their children are in the back seat hearing every word. And I think that we forget how our role modeling influences our children, not just when we're on and we're trying to influence them, but when we think we're off. One of the things we talk about is keeping adult conversation for after dinner. Our 6-year-old charges us, her name's Nikki, and she charges us $0.25 each time my husband and I talk about work, because we've worked together and it's so hard. Sometimes we'll be looking at each other like, I know we want to talk about that fight we had with so-and-so at work, but it's so important that they feel included and they feel important. And so getting back to the car line, there are 2 things you need to talk with your children. One is good communication skills to know how to say what you want to say to them in a way that's not demeaning. It's at their level, but it's not over their head, and you don't know how to adjust to their age level. But the other is listening skills. People don't know how to have conversation starters that work with kids. How was school? Good.
You can't give them
End
a
of
sentence that they have yes or no answers. I learned that as an interviewer. That
Open-ended questions that aren't putting pressure. Did you have a good day at school?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you really at? Say yes so we can move on to the next topic. And they're very aware of those kinds of cues.
And you talk about modeling and the things you do. So many times I catch myself, don't yell! I'm yelling at them to stop yelling, and they're old enough now where there's, you see what she's doing. And it's things that you don't even realize you're doing. But what I've tried to do is catch myself in it and say, I just yelled at you to stop yelling. Yeah, you did.
And that is so important, taking responsibility for your own behavior. I'm not perfect, I'll never be perfect, but when I can turn to my 2 children and say, that wasn't good, do over, that's not something that I'd like you to copy, at least.
We do do-overs. You can start all over again, clean slate, but what I make them do, and I haven't done this in a long time, and it's a good thing that we're reminding me of this now, is that I make them say something nice about each other. You have to start this out by saying something nice. And sometimes it's a struggle for them to think of something nice to say, but then when they get it, everything softens.
Absolutely.
But you have to remember to do it.
You do.
That's the whole thing. You get so tied up, as you say, in the minutia of life that the big things, the values, the things that are important to us, it gets lost.
And that lack of consistency will tell our children, you should feel good about you. You're beautiful. Don't worry about what other people think. It doesn't matter. And then your child watches mommy in the mirror going, I look so fat in this. Does this look terrible? Well, which message do you think they believe? The message they know you're saying is mom, or what they see in you? And so you really have to be aware of those more subtle influences. And so this really is about mindful parenting.
And it's also, it's also about eating in a healthy way, eating in a healthful way, and the body image and the self-esteem, and as you said, what are you eating at the table while you're telling them
Right.
to eat something different?
Right. And being able to be a good role model doesn't just mean acting in a certain way in front. They are so perceptive. They know. My daughter's been famous for finding like a little Oreos wrapper on my nightstand saying, Mother, were you eating these? I'll say, yes, and it's good to have treats sometimes. Incorporating it all in the message. Yes, I meant to do that. That was healthy modeling. But really being open to discussion with them for how they feel about things and what they think about your behavior too.
Right, and we have a funny story in our family. So much revolves around the meal and eating, and one of our funniest stories is my little girl was, I don't know if she was maybe 6 years old, and it's about an Oreo. It was the ones that look like they're from Halloween, and they have the orange icing, and she came in and she was covered. And we said to her, did you have an Oreo? No. Are you sure? Yeah, and her teeth were all orange, and we said, go look in the mirror. But we try to make a joke out of it rather than make her feel ashamed, and then she'd certainly never tell.
Exactly.
She would certainly never tell, but it also became, tried to make it a non-threatening environment. You're going to lose it sometime. Every parent's going to yell and lose it, but if they know that you apologize maybe afterwards, I lost control, and I'm sorry.
Exactly. Like I said, no one's perfect, but these are patterns sometimes that are easy to fall into, and you think, oh, we'll be a better family next year.
Next time.
After New Year's, I'm going to start really focusing on this, and you don't need a parade to decide to make decisions. One of the things we suggest in the book is sort of a family makeover in terms of going through the pantry and deciding together, what does this add to our lives? Is this nutritious? Is this something that we really enjoy? How often should we have it? And again, just be more conscious of the decisions that you make. And if it's your third trip through a drive-through window in the week, very few nutritious things pass through a window. It's time to sit down and think about, how are we so rushed that we don't have time to sit down and eat something that might make us feel better. We
talked about body image and picking what you eat, and you're an expert on eating disorders, and it's happening in younger and younger girls now, and not only girls. That's a big misconception. A lot of people think, oh, it's only teenage girls, but it's young girls, it's men, it's women, and what are we doing to our little girls that has become an issue at such young ages, 8, 9 years old?
The pressures that are out there are just so extreme. I think about my childhood, and I can't recall hearing about weight or people really focusing so much.
We never thought of the Barbie doll being ill-proportioned.
No.
Never. In a million years. I was jealous of her clothes.
This is so disturbing to me, but there was so much attention to Barbie, and if she were a real woman, how disproportionate she would be, and people outraged.
Care.
But what do they come out with? They come out with new dolls, Bratz dolls. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yes.
They're even more.
They've got attitude, and all the T-shirts with the attitude.
Yes.
The T-shirts that say, I have attitude, I'm spoiled, buy me something. My child doesn't have any of those.
But I mean, some of them, they don't even have legs. They only go to the knee. They have a peg so that they can wear really tight boots. And when my daughter received one at a birthday party, I said to her, I'm taking this in for research. And she'd crack up and say, what do you mean? What's so bad about this? And I would show her and say, well, what do you think's bad about this?
So that message is coming in younger and younger.
Younger and younger. And we're actually doing a study on Disney movies and other movies as well that feature princesses. And we're looking at preschool girls to see how early they're actually getting that message that beautiful is good, and beautiful is associated with being extremely thin. And I don't know if you've watched some of the movies where the waist on these characters
and they're very buxom as well.
Tiny. Yes, they're very well endowed, and they're just so unrealistic and set up to be idolized.
We led our little girl to Belle. She's my favorite of the princesses because he was a good-looking guy, but she didn't care. She knew he was a lout. The Beast was a beast, but he had a good heart, and she read. And she was like the only literate princess of them all. And she could care that they said she was beautiful.
Exactly.
She could care less.
Right, and Mulan is another
Mulan.
a good example of someone admired for her strength and her courage.
But she's not big.
No, she is not. Well, you're not going to find a big princess. It's just the way it is.
She's not.
Right.
She's not hot. She's not
popular.
She's not really.
Yes. No, she never hit it off as being one of the more worshipped of the princesses. But there are good messages too. And in Beauty and the Beast, we're talking about Belle. Well, one of my proudest moments as a parent was at the end. We saw this in the IMAX theater, and my daughter at the end starts crying. She didn't like when they turned the prince back into being a gorgeous prince because she thought the Beast was wonderful and he had really changed. And who wants the handsome prince? The Beast was just fine as he was.
That's great.
Yeah, so
you did good.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I've messed up in many other ways. We'll find out about in a few years. But we can do only the best we can to try to limit their exposure to images and messages that aren't healthy for them.
Are there signs very young that there's a problem? I know that we had a situation in our family. My little girl was dancing at a particular ballet school where the older girls were very serious and were very thin, most of them. And there were little posters all over the place warning about the signs of anorexia. And she was 4 or 5 years old, and she noticed, and she said, when am I going to look like a dancer like that? And very, very young, she noticed these very slender girls, and there were so many of them, it couldn't have been the way they were intended to be.
Right.
And we changed goals. I don't know if that was drastic, but I was very concerned that at a very, very young age, she was focusing in on that. And what do I need to do to attain that?
Right. And how did she pick up on the idea that that is so great? I mean, it's one thing to be that thin and be a dancer, but in general they're picking up on this. And it's because the messages are very clear and very pervasive. But the anti-fat messages are just as loud. And it's interesting because right now we have an obesity epidemic in our country, and so there's so much focus on preventing children from becoming so overweight. But what's happening is that they're going to children in health class and teaching them about calories. And my daughter came home one day from school this year and said, "How many calories are there in this apple?" And my heart sank, and I said, "Why?" Well, because we learned today that if you eat too many calories, you get fat, and I don't want to be fat. And I just went into a tailspin and went to the teachers, and we talked about, is it necessary for them to understand calories at age
6 years old?
I mean, it's important to prevent obesity, but you don't want to give them information that being fat is bad and you need to start counting your calories.
There's a commercial, and it's for an organization that has been known to be really right on the mark and weight loss in a good way, and it's the woman who feels like she's the fattest one in the room, who fails more than she succeeds. Do you know which commercial I'm talking about?
No, I haven't seen this, which is odd.
But here you can come and you can change that. And it just strikes me as sending so many of the wrong messages and doing it for the wrong reason, and especially to little children. And you see the shot of this woman sadly walking through an area.
Right.
She knows she's the fattest one in the room.
Right.
I'm horrified at that.
It is horrifying.
But how do you counter that when your daughter's or your son even is watching that?
People are so concerned about people's language or sexual innuendo, and that's not allowed to happen until 9 p.m., but the commercials during regular daytime television are just as influential. And I think you counter that by having them have a very strong base at home, and you touch on these ideas at home about how important is physical appearance, how important is your nutrition or your weight. And some of it is your lifestyle and some is genetic.
Right.
So if you have a large build, your child very well may have a large build. So if you hate yourself and constantly criticize yourself, you're telling them that they're not okay either. They see that they're going to look like you someday. So I think giving really consistent messages about being healthy, valuing positive things like exercise, not being too restrictive.
Right.
Some parents are so worried about their children becoming overweight.
We have dessert every night. Every night. Maybe frozen yogurt, and it may be fat-free, but we have it every night. So I'm hoping, I don't know, it may come back and bite me in the nose, but I'm hoping that they'll realize, I can have a little bit.
Exactly.
I don't have to have the cereal bowl full. We have these tiny little bowls that my brother thinks are just hysterical. But for us, that's what's normal.
Teaching normal portion sizes. You can have lots of different kinds of foods if you don't eat a trough. When you look at the size of the ice cream bowls, the portions, they're just really out of control.
How about for a child that may be an older child that may be exposed to someone who has an eating disorder, and she sees it, but she's really not old enough to fully understand? Do you point it out? Do you say, this is what's going on, and this is a problem, and this is going to hurt her? Is that what you do, or do you ignore it?
That's a really good question, because
it's happening. It's happened twice in my life with my child already.
If they're noticing and they're asking, I think talking about it openly makes it possible for them to feel like these are things they can talk with you about. Whereas if you keep it secret or don't worry about that, that's none of your business, then if they have questions or ideas like,
they'll never ask you.
They're not going to talk to you about that, and you definitely want the lines of communication open. So saying, oh, well, what I always like to tell parents, ask them what they know first. We're always so quick to jump in and here's what it is and here's what I think about it. How about learning to say, well, what do you think about that? Yeah, she's very, very thin.
I remember
Do you think that's healthy?
In junior high school, and an older sister of a girlfriend had this brilliant idea of taking X-Lax to stay thin. And at that time, we didn't know there was a name for it. And I'm almost hoping that maybe a teenager, a pre-teenager will know that that's something that's not right to do, and that's going to hurt you, and it's unhealthy. Right. Because I just thought it was gross, but some of the other girls thought, wow, what a great idea.
What a great idea. In fact, many studies show that some young girls learned how to have an eating disorder through their public health education classes, when they'd say, today we're going to talk about this horrible thing, bulimia, and some people throw up, and then they're
taking notes. How do I do this?
And so they're more interested, and that's where they get the idea. So we've learned about prevention enough to know that it's not about telling them all these horrible things not to do. It's health promotion, telling them how to develop a healthy body image, how to manage their food well.
Just like when they're babies. Instead of telling them no, it's easier to tell them what they can do. Or when you try a puppy, it's the same way. If you tell them what they can do, it's easier than what they can't.
Right.
Oh boy, these are really good lessons. What do you think is the most important message to get out to folks about getting to that table together? Back to the book, what it fosters, more than just a nice time together.
There are so many studies out there that show that families who eat together on at least a semi-regular basis have children who are less likely to get in trouble, less likely to use drugs, drink alcohol, get suspended from school. They're more likely to have high self-esteem and high goals.
And probably be happy, and more likely to be happy in their families.
And have a happier family life. So if we know this, I think what prevents us from doing it is we think of it as a really big deal. It doesn't have to be a big deal, and the benefits far outweigh the small inconvenience of planning.
One step at a time, right? Dr. Stacy Dunn, the book is called Drawing Families Together. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a really good time. Thanks. And thank you for joining us. I'm Charna Davis-Wiese. We'll see you again next time on UCF in Print.